Am I waiting for a thumbs up, or should I just start talking? Okay, hi everybody. I am very, very excited and honored to be here with these two amazing people as part of the 70th anniversary of the Marantz Corporation. I'm a journalist, and so I started actually recording interviews on a Marantz cassette recorder, so kind of full circle for me. But really, just to be here with two people that I greatly admire. Start with you, Max Richter. I'm not going to do the full bio because we probably already know, but one of the great composers working today, and most prolific, I would say, has written for every available medium, opera, ballet, countless movies that we have all shed tears to, and the tears have fallen from our cheeks to the soundtrack of a Max Richter song. And I first actually encountered your music 21 years ago when I was starting a radio show called Radiolab, and I was looking for temp music to score these radio stories with. Somebody handed me a copy of the Blue Notebooks. And it was a combination of minimalist piano, orchestral textures, readings of Kafka, I believe, and I was like, yes, this is it. This is everything. I mean, this is the sound of the show. And I kept using it over and over again as temp music, only temp. And but I used it so often that I actually had to make a no Max Richter rule because it was so good. So that's Max, and also Clemency Burton Hill, one of the great communicators about music, particularly classical music, a violinist, author, novelist, radio host, video host. I know Clemency as a colleague at WQXR and WNYC, where we both worked for a spell. And I also know her as the author of A Year of Wonder, which my family and I are obsessed with.
You know, we, at this moment, 2023 somehow, we have almost literally in our things, the voices at our fingertips, this music. I was about to basically cry. In my former life, before my brain exploded, I was with Dad, like a sort of professional broadcaster and live broadcaster. So I really could get it together. I wouldn't cry on a, broadcast. But there's something in these notes and a combination of humanity, generosity, physics, and many other elements too. It is beyond understanding, and yet it's the easiest thing to feel and understand. And that's, in a way, all music could possibly be that, but it's not. And especially when you're not hearing it like it here, we're so lucky to have this, just to hear that with, wonderful speakers right there. I'm like, we don't need to speak at all. We'll just all listen together and literally emote together. And it feels, somehow a kind of common, shared good.
Max, I'm curious to know. I heard you say yesterday, you don't like to listen to your music because once it's out, you're on to the next thing, and that's just done.
Yeah.
But here we are all listening together. I'm curious what you hear. What comes up for you when you hear the music?
Well, it's like meeting a former version of yourself. That person who made those choices at that time. And I suppose it's kind of a personal history moment for me. You know, when I listen to that, I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, we recorded that piece. Well, we recorded the whole record actually in a day.
Wow.
But we had 3 hours to record all the music in that record because there was no budget, and
Wow.
so it was just friends. You know, we'd all been on the big anti-Iraq War march the week before, so it was all quite raw. A friend of mine who was associated with the Royal Academy where I studied was lucky enough to borrow, they have a Stradivarius cello, the Academy, so he brought his Stradivarius cello along, and he plays the bass line on that piece, and I think that was sort of quite an amazing moment for him and for us. And yeah, we were, you know, just doing the best we could do in that moment. And it was a wonderful experience, you know, because when you're writing a piece of music, you're sitting in your room, and it's a theory, and you don't have an opportunity to test that theory until it's in front of the musicians.
Yeah.
And then you get into a kind of a dialogue and something which is to do with relationships and a kind of shared journey. And yeah, so we recorded this thing, and it felt like a good day. Felt like a good day.
Yeah.
Sometimes you feel like the notes have sort of landed in the right places in some way, that's a good feeling.
Wow. That's amazing to think that all that happened in 3 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you what I hear, and I'll posit this, and curious to get both of your reactions. What I hear in that piece we just played, or let me tell you what I feel. I feel envious and frustrated. Because I was just telling Clemmy backstage that I just wrote a piece for a dance troupe, Pilopolis, and as part of the process of composing the piece, they would put in temp music, and at the penultimate moment of the piece, they put in that.
Yeah.
And they said, "Can you just replace this with something?" And I tried and tried and tried to get something like the feeling that you capture there, and I just couldn't get it.
Okay.
And then it occurred to me, this is probably, that experience is happening on repeat, probably thousands of times, where somebody asks a composer to say, "I want it to feel like this," and they put one of your pieces of music in, and then the composer's like, "God damn him," because there is something so particular that you're able to achieve there, like an emotional register. It almost feels like you invented film music in that piece, which I know is sort of hyperbole, but that's how it feels.
Right.
What's my question? I don't know if I have a question. I'm just curious to hear you bounce off that.
I think you sort of got it in the sense that, like, you know, Max, and he will not say this because he's the most humble person in the world, except possibly Jad, who's, you know, in an other way also, like, you know, just an incredible genius. Like, we are very lucky that we have two actual geniuses on the stage, and yet they're also the most humble and modest and, most importantly, like, curious minds. And so as a person who's been lucky enough to, you know, been in the sort of shadow of this genius in lovely ways, what is kind of unbelievable is that the economy and the spareness of what we get, which is also everything. I mean, you know, music generally is a kind of miracle, I think, because, you know, at least in the Western diatonic register, we basically have 7 notes. 7 notes, and that's everything that we hear. And it's the complexity and the simplicity, and also the fact that we can't really understand it. It's just beyond our understanding. And I think, you know, we've been thinking about Marantz and the incredible scientific engineering ingenuity about these products that then allows us to hear and experience the music in a different way. You know, is again the same kind of magical sort of mystery of like simplicity and yet absolute complexity. And you know, you can think that when we see a beautiful flower or a sunrise, or I probably get I get quite emotional when I think about like you know how lucky we are to experience life at all. But I think I mean, forgive me if I'm getting this completely wrong, but you know, the amazing thing of Max's music and Jad's in a different way work, but like everyone can feel why this is so important and like life-changing, but also it's very accessible, which is a dirty word, especially about classical music, and I would think also, you know, sound engineering and hi-fis and the sort of technical complexity, that it becomes then sort of something that only the people who understand or know how to do it get into the club.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think both of you have done extraordinary work to open up and give people access to these things which are beyond our understanding, but also can transform our lives and experience. So thank you.
Max, how much of that idea, how much of your compositional work has a quiet politics to it? What Clemency was sort of nodding to.
Well, I guess I always felt that, you know, really from the beginning, if I was going to add music to the world, which already has a lot of music in it, if I was going to add to that, then it should be something that I care about deeply and something that I wanted to talk about and felt was important to talk about. I mean, for me, music is a way of talking. And the things I want to talk about are the world we're living in, you know, where we find ourselves. And so I think there's something inherently to do with society in music. Music is about experiencing how other minds see the world. It's a really good way to do that. Creativity generally is a good way to do that. Yeah. And for me, that's always been the basis of, you know, the starting point really of a piece like the Blue Notebooks or Memory House or Infra or Voices. You know, these are all responses to the world as I find it, the world as I experience it as a human being, and they're attempts really to find a shared space where we can think about those things.
But in terms of in the genre, it's funny, as I was sort of scrolling through your work earlier today, I noticed Apple Music puts it in the classical space. And I thought, is that the right label? I don't know. I mean, it seems, I mean, you're a composer who I think doesn't really, you defy one space. You live in many. And it did pose a question for me, and particularly I'd like to talk about Recomposed as we sort of get to that. In the classical space, the balance between old and new is often so tilted towards the old, towards the greats, the three Bs, which can be intimidating for new people to. To what degree do you? Let me ask the question a different way, and maybe this is for both of you. When you think about the audience, who do you imagine? Do you imagine somebody in a velvet seat, or somebody, or is it not even that?
I don't really. I'm trying to talk to one person, really. You know, that sort of very direct.
Do you name that person? Do you name that person?
Not really. I don't really think about categories. You know, I think in a way the idea of categorizing creative works in terms of genres, and you know, I think that's very problematic. And you know, people don't fit into boxes, and artists don't fit into boxes. And actually, I think it's, I'm really just sort of led by the material and the story I'm trying to tell. And I'll use, you know, any means that seem appropriate for that, you know, whether it's traditional instrumentational synthesizers or computers or whatever it is, you know. I'm just trying to convey the material in with as much intensity and directness as I possibly can.
Clemmie, I mean, I'm curious, when you write, when you present, do you see yourself as a popularizer? Because you're right, that can seem like a bad word.
I loathe, like despise, and like really have a like visceral reaction to the idea that, you know, as Max says, like people or things or music or books or should be labeled and sort of portioned or sort of to put it beyond other people's reach. But it is the way, you know, the world that we're living in, and I definitely have never in my life, in my career, thought there's been anything that's like intention in that sense. I was very lucky in the sense that the things I was absolutely passionate about happened to align with sort of what I managed to sort of explore and do as a, you know, person in the world. And as I grew up, I mean, I never particularly felt like I was an adult doing work. It was always just exploring the things that I was most passionate and curious about. But I think particularly in classical music, there I go again. Like it's just music, but I really believe that people understand, you know, whatever it has been over the years that, you know, sort of society and cultural and labels got, you know, put on. You know, I rue the day that you know, before, you know, the, you know, 19th century, there was no classical music. You know, it was just music. There was just music, and there are so many complicated reasons to what now we literally now with technology, like the metadata literally needs to put it into a box and a bucket, which is classical, or this, and and it's incredibly, and there's other very pernicious forces at work with our society and technology. Amazing that technology exists. Obviously, but it's not. It's the way that it's going in terms of the, in one sense we have everything with a push of a button, all music, all genres, all the time. But actually, the way that societies sort of, what I think would think about politics, the division, the idea that we are getting partial, like sort of putting, it's very dangerous, I think, and I don't feel that I'm a popularized, I don't try and do anything particularly, but I just felt like I was very lucky to have the keys in a way, because there are not really any keys anyway. It's just that I, as a white, middle class person who happens to have the worst name in the world, so I sound like I'm a posh, classical music person, but by stealth. I mean, it's too complicated to explain that, but I don't believe that I have more access to classical music than a person who has no, because as long as we have ears and a human brain and heart, soul, whatever you to call it, then it's yours. And everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
So, I suppose in a very tiny little way, I also feel slightly political in that sense. The idea that people in boats crossing oceans to be somewhere else, everyone should be welcome. We're just human beings. We're all in this together. We need each other. We all, we're all going to catastrophically fail if we don't be together. So, and music, of course, is an incredible force for bringing people together.
This goes back to my childhood. I fell in love with the original Vivaldi when I was a tiny kid, probably like we all did. You hear that music and it's like so attractive, and short sections, stories, beautiful melodies, drama. It's great. So I loved this thing, and then I get older, I study music, become an adult, and I mostly hear the Four Seasons when I'm trying to buy car insurance on the phone, and somebody's like,
hotel lobbies.
Your call is important to us.
Yeah.
It's like, So I grow to hate this music that I formerly loved. So I decided to try and rediscover it for myself. And I imagined, Vivaldi's original as a sort of a beautiful landscape. And what I wanted to do is go off-road in that beautiful landscape and walk through it in a different way and try to encounter it for the first time. So really that's what I did. I sort of dove deep into the score and tried to discover little atoms and spaces which seemed like I could have a conversation with those. And I mean, that piece it's based on just a couple of tiny atoms from the original Spring, which are these birdsong motifs, and the solo fiddle plays, right quite near the beginning. It's just a little solo fiddle line, and I thought, in the Vivaldi original there are 2 or 3 birds, So the solo fiddle plays, and then the leader plays also this sort of answering thing. And then I thought, well, what if all the birds started singing? So I just sort of made this kind of cascade of bird songs.
Wow.
And I like that as an image to open up with, you know, this idea of like everything is singing.
Wow, that's lovely.
What a
That's
image.
lovely.
I
Yeah.
mean, you know, you think the kind of climate anxiety right now, and you think about like Silent Spring and the Carson, and just that there's so much hope that Max sort of is able to transmute that. You know, I feel like, you know, and I hate to like, you know, assume that people have these reactions. I mean, obviously me and Jad are like, we're like, you know, we can just listen to this forever and that's sort of fine, but that's the end. And can I just do a very quick, annoying kind of, you know, you don't have to say, but like how many of you feel like this, like, speaks to you? This, I mean, yeah. So, like, you know, there's something in that, in a way that, like, you know, birdsong is so sort of almost basic, sorry to say, like, you know, the sort of vernacular of today, like, sort of, we almost don't hear it, especially in New York City. You know, when was the last time you actually heard the birds? And yet there's somehow, like, I suddenly have this image of the kind of cascade of all the birds is just like something unbelievably motivational somehow.
Yeah.
So like,
But I mean, just to argue with what you both said just for a second. I mean, it's a silly question to ask now, given the incredible popularity of this music that you made. But if you can rewind your mind back to the before, why go back to Vivaldi? Why not go forward and make new things and new styles and new sounds, which clearly you are?
Yeah.
Why mess with Vivaldi at all?
It was really just a personal exorcism, you know. I care passionately about music. I love it. And I had this schism. I had two attitudes about the same material. You know, I love it. I had a personal history with it, but I also hated it. And I really needed to reconcile that just as a musician, as a composer, as a human. I just wanted to kind of lay that ghost somehow. So it's really a very personal project. I wrote it to kind of get it out of my system, in a way.
Yeah.
how's that going?
You know, what's funny is, for me personally, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me personally, it did work, because I now have heard the original played in concerts, and I'm like, yeah, it's good.
Oh, interesting.
I've sort of fallen back in love with the original.
So you no longer hear insurance commercials?
No, I don't.
Interesting.
I'm sorry to like butt in, Dad, but did you ever feel that Vivaldi was in dialogue with you, or just the music?
I don't really know. I mean, I sort of, you know, a lot of, when the record was released, you know, people would ask me, you know, what do you think Vivaldi would have thought of this? And, I mean, I guess there's two thoughts on that, really. The first is that, you know, Vivaldi recomposed Vivaldi a lot, and kind of so did everyone. I mean, it's a thing which has been in music history forever, and especially in the Baroque, you know, sort of repurposing and reworking. And that's just one of the things that musicians do. And the other thing I thought about was, well, you know, if Vivaldi had any objections, he had plenty of time to kind of haunt my sleep, you know, and give me some trouble.
Well, luckily, you have a really good album to help with sleep. So,
But I kind of felt like he would have, you know, he could have made himself known, made his thoughts known on the subject.
Huh.
I feel like he's as like, Max, my friend, thank you.
I mean, one more thought. I wonder if I could sort of ask a music nerd question, since we're in a room full of music nerds, I think. The low chords that we were hearing,
Yeah.
was there electronics mixed in there?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean, there is, in that piece, as kind of in all my work, really, there's a sort of a balance between the electronic and the acoustic. And I mean, actually, you know, the way the violin lines are handled, so this sort of blossoming of all these violin lines, I mean, that, you know, one way of thinking about that is, it's counterpoint, you know? It's like, it's canon, it's imitation, it's, you know, that's kind of a classical thing. But at the same time, it's actually the kind of thing you make in a studio with a delay line. You know, you just put a delay line on the violin and hey, you've got like this cascade of violins. You know, so it's a kind of an electronic music technique. And then those slow-moving parallel chords underneath. There is a subsonic electronic line. So there's an old Moog synthesizer, you know, way down there.
Interesting.
Giving us that sort of another dimension to the sonics, which aren't really available with acoustic instruments.
Well, I find that really interesting in that it occurred to me as I was having that question, was that like a sub-bass line? The electronics that you work into your music are very humble. You know, electronic music, because it's amplified, sometimes can overpower. It can swallow the acoustic. But you're very careful about the balance between them, I find.
Well, for me, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to, again, it comes down to a kind of minimalism. You know, I'm trying to only do what's essential to kind of tell the story. I don't want any kind of look at my notes kind of thing, you know, or sort of product demo electronics. I don't really want to do that. You know, I'm trying to tell a story without getting in the way of the story.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I want to kind of get
Love the
across.
conversation between like the old synthesizer and the Moog and the like Strad bass. So you know the cello, but then you know sub bass, and that shouldn't be a problem. Like those, they are having their conversation, and you know, in a way, all music instruments, whether it's you know right at the beginning the flute that you know came, I hate to say, like the very 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 early humans fashioned, to you know the absolute you know most sophisticated instruments of today in terms of technology. So I love that interplay and dialogue over the centuries, over the sound worlds, and the sort of all the dimensions. I mean, but also in terms of you know what we're you know celebrating in terms of Marantz today. You know, just to hear this today, like I was like, give me more of that. I mean, the dimension, the space of those moments of, I don't know about you, but like I feel all the time just sort of, kind of, almost you know, way down with life. Maybe that's because of you know some things that's been going on, but there's some that's amazing. Like spatial freedom, but yet grounding, you know, and of course, ground bass is a thing, and basses, you know, they are going deep, and there's something kind of incredibly dimensional, which is really wonderful in the context of the piece, I think.
It's also true. I mean, it speaks to me also about the difference between listening on headphones versus listening in a room. Your body is engaged in a room like this, whereas It's just your ears, just your head. It does make me wonder, though, what's the question? Like, functionally, how does one, I can't help but feeling that even to be a composer right now in the musical landscape, in the economic reshifting that's happening, how does one be a composer functionally on a minute-to-minute, day-by-day basis? It strikes me as a really hard job description right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think... Yeah, I mean, I think that from my standpoint, you know, it started really with just an enthusiasm from childhood, really, to be around music, to play with other people. And then, you know, you start making music with your friends, whether that's in a band or whether you're, you know, playing whatever, string quartets or whatever it might be. And, you know, like when we recorded the Blue Notebooks, those were my friends, you know. We were going off to this, instead of hanging out, we went to the studio, you know. And it's that sort of thing, and to concentrate on those kind of social and human things rather than career. You know, a career is an abstraction, and it may happen, it may not happen, but you know, as long, you've got to be having a good day today if you can, rather than, you know, I mean, Recomposed, for example, you know, was kind of viewed by, you know, various people around me as kind of career suicide at the time.
Oh, really? Why? What was the next
because
sentence?
you don't, you know, I mean, why would you do that? Why would you, like, take on the Four Seasons and make a new piece out of it?
Oh, because the classical music elite are going to come with pitchforks? Is that why? Okay.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? It's crazy. It's sort of blasphemy and all of that. So I've kind of never thought about those things. I've only ever thought about, you know, the notes on the page.
Interesting. So, because I was wondering as you were talking, like, okay, so and this must happen constantly. Young composers in their 20s or 30s come and say, "What advice do you have for me?"
Yeah.
And do you ever feel like you were grandfathered in some way into a society that appreciates music in a certain way, and now we're in a different space? And how do you talk across that space to these new folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually composers, like young composers, and I don't mean classical composers, I mean artists working in music today, whether we call them producers or composers or whatever. You know, I think they have a much more plural and kind of open-eared culture than was the case, you know, basically before the internet, before streaming. You know, people are now able to just follow their enthusiasms from one song to another, one piece to another, just, you know, clicking around and finding things which speak to them. So I think that's a positive. I think that's, you know, if we go back to this idea that music is a way to experience other ways of being in the world, other minds, other ways of seeing things, then that's great, you know. And I mean, the one thing that everyone has got that, in a way, no one else has got is they have their biography. They have the experiences that they've been through, the things that have happened to them. And for me, I mean, it's really difficult to advise people, but I always try to point people back to the things that are unique to them, rather than trying to, you know, be a certain kind of artist. They should be their kind of artist.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess before we throw it to audience questions, Clemmy, I'm curious to hear you on the same topic. I mean, I sometimes, Max, so much of your work is about asking people to take a minute, just pause. I think your sleep piece, the 8-hour sleep piece, had very much that spirit of, we're all on our phones doing this constantly. Let's just, for a moment, pause and slow down and really intentionally be in this space. I'm curious, Clemmy, how you process that as somebody who cares so passionately about music, but sees music as increasingly, you know, it's the thing that happens during insurance commercials, or as you're walking through a lobby?
I feel that the music is robust and can deal with us, multitasking around it. And, I feel that in a way, a lot of the problems with classical music is that people feel like, oh, I can't sort of engage with it until I've got my fancy dress on and my black tie and my extremely expensive Met Opera ticket, and I can't do that until all those things are in place. And of course, I think, 100% there is a time to really listen with intention and focus, and my own life is definitely better when I have those moments. And I can see that with my kids, I'm with my friends, my husband, not because they need to have library silence, but just a sense of this is what we're doing right now. But I really believe that the music can still enhance the washing out all the emails, or even the waiting for the fucking insurance company, which I do all the time. I mean, not the car insurance, but definitely the health insurance. And I think, my God, if just imagine if Max could license recomposed for all of those on hold things. So it's not the AI generated version of the Four Seasons or the Bach Double, whatever it is. How amazing would it be to have the actual nourishing source material rather than the sort of simulated thing. But I do think, sort of personal mission with classical music particularly is don't wait until the circumstances are completely right. Just listen. Just literally press play and listen in however that means for you right now, if you can. Just go for it, rather than waiting for the perfect circumstances, because often that doesn't ever happen.
Yeah. All right, before we throw it to you guys' questions, if you've got them, I just want to thank you both. You're both inspirations, and this has been such a joy. So who has questions?
Questions for Max. Trauma is a very popular topic for musicians and composers. And one of my favorite pieces of music that you scored was Waltz with Bashir.
Right.
I have a personal connection with my cousin Sir with Ari Folman in the IPF.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I'm curious how you got sort of affiliated with doing the score for that film, and why, because obviously making movie soundtracks is so appealing to you.
Yeah. Well, so Waltz came about in a way accidentally, sort of out of the blue. I had never scored a film, and I wasn't planning on it really. I didn't know how to do it, So I got an email out of the blue from this guy, Ari Folman, who was a novel-length email about this film he'd just finished writing. He'd been in a shack on a beach for 4 days listening to this record of mine, and now I've written this film. And I was like, okay, Anyway, so we got talking a little bit, and he sent me, he'd made a little 30-second trailer, which was incredible. And I'd never seen anything like it. And I thought, the thematic aspect of the film, which is to do with trying to recover memory, trying to understand a traumatic event. I thought it was a very powerful story and an important story. So Ari sent me the script because, you know, animation, it takes forever. And they had a tiny crew, you know. Ari sort of mortgaged his house to get it made and you know, I mean, it was like a really, not a big production, shall we say. So they sent me the script and I just started writing material from the script. And I wrote pretty much all of the main music just off the page. And then we went into a kind of a bit of a conversational process with the images and the sculpting the score. And we recorded that again in an afternoon. Again in an afternoon with my friends, you know. So, yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's a wonderful score.
Thank you. Amazing film.
You illustrated a really interesting, relatable moment of receiving some of Max's music in a temp score. My question is, Max, have you ever received a temp score with your own music in it, where they want you to?
Yeah. All the time. All the time.
And what is your process?
Yeah, it's not easy. Well, I mean, I try to, you know, if I'm doing a film, I actually try to just get it without a temp, you know, so I never really, but I mean, it does get temped a lot. I try to come to a project without having sort of heard music on it. I prefer to try and discover something new out of the conversations we're having, you know, with the creative team and the material. So you know, I know why people, obviously you know, editors need temp. It helps them to kind of find the architecture and the temp, you know, the grammar of the thing. And I get it, but for me, I don't really want to hear it. You know, it doesn't actually help.
You weren't like, oh, I can do recomposed. Recomposed,
yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. So, thinking about the future of music, production techniques evolving, etc., where's music in 10, 20, 30 years? Like, what's changed? What's different? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess, you know, the big changes that have come about over the last few years with online platforms and streaming, that will kind of, I guess, mature into just what's happening. That's the normal now. And, you know, particularly in that domain, I guess it's, you know, for me, what's nice is that we're starting to get really high quality playback, which I think for classical music, for instrumental music is really beneficial, you know, things which aren't sort of super compressed and, you know, just kind of made to kind of punch out of the speakers. Then you have really benefits from that kind of thing. I guess, you know, there's a lot of conversation about AI and music, and, you know, AI systems simulating the work of composers. And I'm sure there's already a lot of that, obviously, but there will be more of that because there are, you know, inevitable kind of economic drivers which will, you know, you don't have to pay royalties to an AI. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. Probably some kind of earthquake in the music business, I guess.
pretty depressing.
Well, yeah, it could be. It could be.
I mean, just to offer maybe an optimistic note, although it could also be seen, I'm realizing, as the exact opposite. I mean, on my side of the business, which is more the storytelling and the podcasting, I've had a lot of conversations with companies who right now, and this might be one of those trends that just kind of blows through like a weather pattern. But how can we insert the listener into the story? That's sort of a big conversation. And I expect that that will be just a trend that happens in music, you know, that, oh, I love Max's music, but I'd love to hear horns. Can I put that? And that you become the composer along with him. You sort of, every act of listening becomes potentially a co-authorship with the composer because of the tools that you can separate out stems now very quickly. You can create mashups very, very quickly. You just click, click, click. So I imagine that music will become a thing that we all do to the music. And I don't know what that means for composers or for, but I don't even know if I'm right.
It's interesting, yeah. It could happen, yeah.
I'm curious what you think of the future of the album format, because I think one of the biggest things that's happened is just the universal accessibility of music. You can have anything you want, anytime you want. But if you have a theme, classical is very strong with that, then you can have an album and keep somebody within it instead of having. And I'm just wondering, like, if you see a future for the album, and also the democratization, I don't think it's just the listener. I think it's the fact that you can be a creator, that you can compose, and if the composition is good enough, then sure, you can step that up from VST plugins and to live to an orchestra. And that where you see the potential there for creative talent, like emerging organically.
I mean, the album format is itself a sort of outcome of technology, right? I mean, it was just to do with, like, suddenly you could make a record which lasted, you know, half an hour aside or whatever it was, and so people did. Right? It's just what happened. So, but I feel like the album is a sort of parallel to, you know, in classical music, the symphony or something. You know, it's a sort of a big object. It's a substantial object, which, or the novel, you know, it allows you to tell a story, to present ideas in an interrelated way. And for me, I make albums because I love albums. You know, some of the things made me fall in love with music originally were, you know, albums. You know, so I like this idea of something which has got space enough for nuance and interrelated ideas, and that for me is exciting. It's not the only way. You know, loads of young artists are really just making individual tracks, you know. You make your track, you upload it, that's it, we're done, you know. Which is fine, which is absolutely fine. You know, I just think it's contextual, isn't it? I mean, it depends what you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
We have time for one more, so.
I was just curious, how long does it take from inception, like when you did Recompose, from when you first thought about doing it to actually recording it? What kind of a timeline is that?
It was fairly quick. I mean, the writing part was maybe, I don't know, a month or something like that. Not very long, really. But then there was a certain amount of trying to persuade someone that it was a good idea. That took a lot longer. There was a kind of incredulity factor to deal with. Yeah. Sure.
Well, I want to thank you both for the work that you've both done, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.